15 to 20 years, that has shifted dramatically. Specifically when we think about the American film critic and when the demise of that traditional film critic really started to take into effect. Many have looked at the year 2012 as being sort of the bellwether year because a lot of media companies were starting to lay off very prominent film critics because it just didn't quite align with their profit margins. So, some of the reasons why, like I just said, traditional news media's newspapers, magazines, television, the size and the impact that they had, especially over matters like film criticism, started to erode. And specifically when the internet and the rise of social media found a way to sort of democratize what had typically been a very monolithic position. How many of you remember the days of Siskel and Ebert? Can anyone name, aside from our present company, our local guy, can anyone name a film critic that they routinely go singularly to in order to get their film criticism? Cale, yeah. Who has been deceased since 2000.
When I used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like these new people. I don't go to a single source anymore.
Yeah. And that's because all of a sudden everything has been culled together from all sorts of different disparate places. So it also means that the potential audiences no longer seek or trust a singular critical voice like they had in the past, like a Pauline Kael, like a Richard Corliss. The closest that I would say we even have to this day would be someone like Matt Zoller Seitz. Has anyone ever heard of his name? Richard Brody. Yeah, so there's a couple of nods here and there, but no one anywhere near the level that Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel and Pauline Kael, you know, the glory days of what was typically considered the golden era of American film criticism. But the most interesting thing, and I'll get a little more into this in a bit, the motion picture industry adopted, co-opted, and purchased the most popular sites to enhance marketing strategies. So, with that, here are some of the most popular film or user review aggregators. So, at the top, in terms of monthly visits, we have IMDb, which was said earlier. That, by and large, is the largest website that you can go to in order to get any sort of information about virtually anything to do with motion pictures and cinema. Then we have Rotten Tomatoes. There's a little bit of a distant second in terms of monthly visits. Letterboxd, which to be honest with you, I don't know if that number reflects the amount of app usage or whether or not that is strictly going to letterboxd.com through a browser. And then lastly, Metacritic. So a few interesting notes. Letterboxd, which is the newest of the group, has definitely sort of overtaken in terms of the stickiness of the site. How many of you use Letterboxd currently? How many of you kind of know what it is? All right, so Letterboxd is an app-based type of aggregator, but it doesn't do film critics. What it does is it generates user reviews. So users can write an actual review. The issue is with that and with IMDb.com, which is also another user review aggregator. If they write a review, it can be a one-sentence hot take as opposed to a fully formed exploration of the merits of whatever that piece of cinema is. Now, Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes are true aggregators because in terms of American film criticism, they cull the internet. They have, and I'll talk more about Rotten Tomatoes in a moment, but they have different distinctions in terms of how to become an actual Rotten Tomatoes critic, and the same with Metacritic as well. But again, the interesting thing is that with IMDb, people just kind of go and check out, oh, wait, were they in that movie? You know, it's usually a very specific search. Whereas with Letterboxd, because it's app-based and started out as an app, it's way more communal. So, and definitely skews towards a younger demographic. So it would be more student demographic than us faculty. Now, the amount of time spent on Letterboxd is almost, I would say, twice the nearest competitor, and that being IMDb. And again, the reason for that is it's app-based and it is a very sticky site, because if all of a sudden you look up one movie, you're then presented with information about the director, the actors, you can get into the cast and crew, you can get into the reviews that are generated by fellow users. So again, that's why a lot of younger film goers, especially Gen Z and Gen Alpha, if their parents let them, will go to Letterboxd because they'll get something that accurately reflects a generational perspective. Whereas with Metacritic, as you heard Andy say a little bit earlier, it's a little more geared towards your traditional top critics at your New Yorkers, at the major publications that still have staff positions. But then again, when you look at page views, that's where IMDb comes into play and dwarfs all of them in terms of popularity. Now, here's the interesting thing about Rotten Tomatoes. How many of you knew that it is owned by NBC Universal / Comcast and Warner Brothers Discovery? And real quick, show of hands, how many of you use routinely Rotten Tomatoes to make your decisions? So, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest in there, isn't it? Now, how films are adjudicated is the tomato meter. So it is a scoring listing of 0 to 100, but there are scoring segments. So even though it has a numeric scoring, they then break it down into 4 different distinct, or I wouldn't say distinct, but 4 different categories. First and foremost is certified fresh, and that's anything from 75 to 100 on the tomato meter. A fresh red tomato, which just means fresh, 60 to 74. A green splat tomato is 0 to 59. So it's a little bit of a huge margin there. And then if it's a faded tomato, that means that there is no score. There are films that have not garnered enough either audience or critic responses in order to give it a proper tomato meter score. Now, it's a little different when the scoring segments break into the audience, because instead of tomatoes, it's popcorn buckets. So, full popcorn bucket is anywhere from 60 to 100. Spilled popcorn bucket, 0 to 59. Faded popcorn bucket means it has no score. How many of you would feel good about this grading scale as a student or professor? Yeah, me neither. Absolutely not. So you have very nebulous numbers. You also have very broad segments. So there's not a whole lot, honestly, to go off of, other than if you look at it from a traditional academic standpoint, where, oh, if it's like over 90, it's got to be really good. It's a must-see. But how many of you, and again, I count myself among all film goers, have been to a movie or have gone to one yourself based on a tomato meter rating, and then you walk out and you say to yourself, how was that a 95? I think, no?
No, well, it's a recommendation rate, though. Like and so it's like 75% of critics saying thumbs up, rather than, and so, yeah, I'm sort of used to, that's not a 95, because it's just the majority of critics thought it was better than crap.
Exactly. But there's a sneaky little number that very few people know about when it comes to Rotten Tomatoes. So on the left, we have the top critics for the tomato meter. And the reason why I use Star Wars The Force Awakens in my dissertation as a case study is because it is the most popular film of all time, according to box office receipts. So everyone went and saw this in the theater. It's still number one, I believe, isn't it?
Domestically.
Yeah, domestically, yeah. Yeah, not worldwide. But yeah, domestically, absolutely. So we have top critics who say 89% absolutely go and see it. We have the fresh, we have the rotten, and then we've got a sneaky little number down here, which is the average rating. Now, if we were to multiply 8.2 by 10, that would give us an 82, correct? What does that wonderful number say right there? That's a full 7-point swing in the positive. On top of that, we have the audience score. So the audience score, 84, 4.2, you multiply that times 2 in order to get a comparable rating, and we've got ourselves an 84. So not much difference in terms of an 82 and an 84, but an 89 and an 84, that's a B plus or a solid B, if we're, again, looking at it from the perspective of an academic rating. Now, when we get to all critics, all of a sudden, whoa, we've gone from basically a little over 80 plus to 453 reviews. But look at that rating. Woo, 93. That's an A. That is a must see. However, we look down here at that magic little number, the average rating. And we find out that it is a much more realistic 8.3, which then multiplied to mimic where we are here, it's an 83. So it's a full 10 points off in terms of the actual number. Now, at one point, Rotten Tomatoes did actually have their scores and how they're calculated presented on their website. However, studios and others found a way to game that system, so they brought it in, and it is now considered proprietary information. So no one really knows how those scores are tabulated and what critics, especially when it comes to top critics, get a bigger bump in terms of their perspective. All right, so top critics, all critics, and then the audience scores are the same. Now, these numbers are maybe a little tough to see, but what I did in my research is I took Rotten Tomatoes' top 100 films of each year, going back to 2010, and then all the way to, in this case, 2023. Now, the interesting thing to note is we start at 87 for all of the top 100. So that's the aggregate number of the aggregate, if that makes any sense. That is also the same year that website was purchased by a different media conglomerate. Initially, it was, I believe, 20th Century Fox, a subsidiary of 20th Century Fox, and Fox Corp had it, and then they sold it to Warner Brothers that year. So all of a sudden, Warner Brothers is sitting on what they think is a golden goose, because now they have a new apparatus to market films. Now granted, not just their films, but the entire industries. They could also, if they wanted to, neg another movie and bump it down. But that year of purchase, all of a sudden we see 87, 90, 90, 91, 92, all the way to 2020. And then magically, in a year that is riddled with pandemic issues and theaters not even open or limited capacity, the number magically goes up. Why would they want to do that? Is it because the films of 2020 were spectacular on a level that previous years weren't? Or do you think that it might have something to do with a self-serving motivation to get people back in the theater? How many of you went and saw something during the pandemic? I wasn't going near a theater that year. Absolutely not. I waited until 2021, and then I was like, okay, you sit over there, I'll sit over here. All right. Now we see that the numbers have kind of come significantly down from the 97, but still much higher than 87%, because we're now talking about a B plus-ish to a solid A. But another topic that many film critics and audiences have had conversations and conflicts about is the distance between a film critic and the general audience, especially when it comes to what they actually think about the film. Now, we've got the tomato meter here, and then this is the average rating for all of these films. The difference being quite significant across the board. But the number that we want to focus on right now is what the average rating is versus what the average rating is for the audience. Now, 78, 77. Would you say that there's much difference between critical appraisal and audience appraisal? No, there is not. So, again, that myth between critical reception and audience reception. Now, granted, there are movies that are critic proof. How many of you went and saw Captain America recently? How many of you read a review before you went and saw Captain America? So 1 out of 3, that ain't bad. But at the same time, that's not a whole lot because it's a Marvel movie. We want to go and see a Marvel movie. We want to be impressed with the spectacle. We aren't necessarily looking for anything earth-shattering in terms of humanistic approaches and perspectives, although sometimes they do try to sneak something in. But on the whole, you want to go and enjoy a movie in a theater that is going to be loud, filled with special effects, and enjoy it. But conversely, you have films that are more geared towards, I would say, artistic and intellectual pursuits, and not so much is something that relies on the spectacle of it, but something that's engaging and engrossing from an emotional perspective. How many of you saw any of the Best Picture nominees this year? Which one? Or ones?
I forget what.
All right, must have been a great one.
Yeah, I can list them.
I forgot it too.
All right, even better.
Do you want me to list the Best Picture nominees?
Yeah.
The Brutalist, The Substance, okay, so I think I'm making your point. Complete Unknown, the Anora, not the Anora, it's actually just called Anora. Amelia Perez. Oh,
I'm Still Here.
I'm Still. Wait.
Who's
yeah.
on Wicked?
Wicked. That's,
See, everyone. Yep, there we go.
There's your.
There we go. We nailed it. So you have seen that. But did you see it because it's wicked, or did you see it because a critic said, this is absolutely amazing, go and see it? You saw it because it's wicked. Yeah, exactly. All right. So again, the sneaky little score that if you are going to use Rotten Tomatoes, now I'm not telling you not to. I think that that's probably the biggest takeaway from this. I'm not saying don't use any of these aggregates. I'm just showing you how to use them properly. Because if not, you're going to get stuck on these numbers. And you're going to say, that's going to be amazing. And then you're going to be one of those people that I hear coming out of the theater saying, how is that a 95? That film was garbage. I don't want it. So again, keep that in mind. You want to look at what the average rating is and then make your decision that way. Because that is the true aggregate number for Rotten Tomatoes. But here's another interesting thing, and again, this is where the conflict of interest plays. There was an article in, what was it, The Ringer, that was written by Lindbergh and Arthur, that took, I think it was a sample size of over 5,000 movies that were rated in a tomato meter reading for the scores, and basically plotted out and charted. So it was a much larger sample size than my 100, what have you. And as you can see, when Rotten Tomatoes was in its infancy, which was the late 90s, scores were generally high. And then they started to kind of go down, which, to be honest with you, those of us who remember those days, with the exception of 1999, they're not entirely wrong. But all of a sudden, News Corp comes in and buys it right around in here. And then you start to see a little bit of variance, but 2010 hits, and now Warner Brothers owns it. And now they sold it, I want to say around 2015, maybe 2016, so that the majority share was Universal Comcast. All of a sudden, every movie that is being rated by Rotten Tomatoes is fresh. Go see it. They're all great. What are you waiting for? So, every single release.
Is this average score or tomato meter score?
Tomato meter score.
Tomato meter.
Yeah. Yeah, average score, you know that those numbers are going to be probably flat.
Right.
Because there's not much variance in them. But when it comes to tomato meter, that is the score that you're getting. You're basically probably anywhere from 65 to 67%, which means that it is fresh. Go see it. Don't worry, you're going to enjoy it.
So this is these are the critics and not the users? Or is this
Correct. These are the critics.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, enough about Rotten Tomatoes. I think I've trounced on them enough. Metacritic. Right now it's currently owned by this strange conglomerate called Fandom Incorporated. Has anyone ever gone to Fandom? How is it?
Oh, it's fine. It's
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, it's a very strange place because it's essentially like Wikipedia.
It's what.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the parent company that owns it. So what you have in terms of adjudication method, you have the Metascore and the user score. The user score is fairly new because there was a while where they didn't have user scores, but in order to keep up with the Joneses, specifically with Rotten Tomatoes, they wanted to make sure that they had it good to go and have that sort of user interaction. Now, the scoring is not unlike the tomato meter in that it's 0 to 100 for the Metascore, and then the user score, oddly enough, they decided to differentiate it, and it's 0 to 10. But again, using pretty basic mathematics, you can inflate the scores to make them commiserate with one another. The scoring segments, universal acclaim, 90 to 100. Generally favorable reviews, 75 to 89. Mixed or general reviews, 50 to 74. Generally unfavorable reviews, 20 to 49. Overwhelming dislike, 0 to 19. That's where most of your DC movies are these days. So, again, we've got, while better than Rotten Tomatoes, still nothing particularly definitive when it comes to, oh, that number, yeah, absolutely, I should go see that movie. But also, not a lot of people use Metacritic compared to Rotten Tomatoes, as we saw in the previous chart in terms of actual users. Now, Internet Movie Database, owned since pretty much the jump, at least in terms of the internet age, by Amazon, with the exception of about 6 years when Cole Needham, who's the founder, ran it independently. But Amazon very early on said, we see the promise in something like this, and we're going to give you money, and then you can keep running it. And the man, Cole Needham, actually just stepped away this year. He's been running it since the early 90s, so he's had a pretty good run with it. But the interesting thing is, in terms of adjudication, it's an IMDb rating, but they also use Metascore. So if you're looking for more of that acute critical perspective, you don't have to go very much further than just go to IMDb, which again, I think is another reason why people don't frequent Metascore as much. Now, the scoring segments are numeric, they're not specified. So it's just a number, have at it. But especially when it comes to the IMDb rating. And then obviously the scoring segments are for Metascore or what we just covered. The most interesting thing that I found in my research, and I thought that maybe at some point in time they would have had someone, they had no staff critics throughout its entire history. And they had, oh, what were you going to say, Jim? No, go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So one of my friends works on IMDb for their special features segment, and he technically is a film critic, but he is not employed, as you say, by IMDb to work as a film critic. So I'm sorry,
yeah, he doesn't have that IMDb byline.
Right.
Yeah.
But he does work as, he does have an IMDb byline, but not on reviews that are posted on IMDb.
There you go.
So, sorry.
No, that's good. No, but that's good to know. Now, it allows for user-generated reviews, but they wisely took down their discussion board because that was where what are deemed the film bros like to hang out. There were a lot of issues as pertaining to discussion boards and also to intentionally tanking movies. There have been numerous examples of that over the years where if someone didn't like the way something was represented, especially in a comic book movie or something along those lines, they would intentionally go and give a low rating in order to decrease the popularity and the likelihood that someone seeing that number and basing their viewing solely on that number, they're not going to go and see it based on that. But IMDb is great for information, but when it comes to any sort of real, true critical appraisal, maybe not so much. And then lastly, Letterboxd. Letterboxd is now, as of the end of 2023, co-owned. Initially, it was solely owned by the creators, Matthew Buchanan and Carl von Randow, which is an awesome name. They're two guys from New Zealand that just wanted to put out an app and see what people liked and build a community, and then all of a sudden it turned into a thing. I use Letterboxd a lot. I used it a ton when I was doing my dissertation because there's this crazy thing called creative procrastination. And what I would do is I would go onto it and then I would find all of the movies that I had seen throughout my life and I would say, I've seen that. And then all of a sudden I hit 10,000 and I was like, whoa, okay, I've seen a lot of movies. And that's not even including the ones that I've seen 150 times. And that would be definitely Monty Python Holy Grail right up there. But with Letterboxd, again, I think they're starting to look at having in-house critics, but they currently don't have any at the moment. The adjudication method is 5 stars. So 0.0 to 5.0, and the scores are exclusively user-generated. So it is peer-to-peer in that respect. It's saying, hey, I just went and saw Anora. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm Gen Z, and you're Gen Z, and you're looking to go see a movie this weekend. Go see Anora, because it's got like a 4.5, which means that it's amazing. And traditionally that happens, although a recent example, another Best Picture nominee, Emilia Perez, recently embroiled in a lot of scandal, a lot of bad tweets leading to what was a firm 4.1 is now sitting at about a 2.1. So all of a sudden, everyone reappraised the situation and said, nope, and brought their numbers significantly down. So there's no scoring segment, so again, it's just raw 5-star system, and that's it. But it does allow for user-generated reviews, but much like IMDb, it can be a hot take, quick 4-word review, as opposed to anything, and snarky as it gets. Or it can be something that's very thoughtful. A lot of critics do post excerpts and then say, hey, come and check it out at Vulture or wherever they write for. And then what's really kind of driving it these days is that a lot of filmmakers, how many of you have heard of Martin Scorsese? He's on it, Francis Ford Coppola's on it, Michael Mann's on it, and then Io Debris, I think I just butchered her name, sorry if you're watching this, she has the most followers. So you can follow people and have people follow you. Another thing that's great and what makes it really sticky is your top 4. So you can assign 4 movies that define you as a human being and have other people look at them, and then you can sort of find like-minded folks who like the weird stuff, or again, just like Marvel movies. It runs the gamut when it comes to Letterboxd. All right, now the system that I've devised is called Synological. And again, I think it's important to root it in a firm definition, because without it, it's just kind of a cool word, maybe. But Cine, if we're breaking Synological into its roots, Cine stands for motion picture. Logical is characterized by or capable of clear sound reasoning. Now, again, when I asked everyone to raise their hand and say, who knows an actual modern working film critic? No one really could. Why is that? Except for George.
And also, why didn't you raise your hand, Andy? You know me. You too.
Exactly. But that's kind of the point, is because we've migrated into this aggregated film criticism culture, where we're not interested in what an individual critic as much, and as used to be historically what we would do. Now we want something that that gives us an understanding of what it is that we're potentially going to go and experience. But that doesn't really happen, because how many of you read reviews before you go in and see a movie? How many of you typically wait until after in order to have a dialogue with that critic? So, what I ideally would like Synological to be is a home for astute critical voices and diverse perspectives of cinema criticism. And again, I say cinema criticism in the least pretentious way possible. Because to me, cinema is all of it. It's motion pictures. It's film, something that explores and looks to build on the vocabulary of motion pictures, or present a story that might be challenging in a way that isn't just a movie, where it is pure entertainment. It's meant for commerce. It's meant to get you into the theater on opening weekend so that they can announce, $100 million for it. So I also want it to mirror the current and future makeup of the movie-going population, because people are still going to see movies. They're still going to the cinema to see something. And I think that communal perspective, to be honest with you, the reason why, it is the only reason why cinema going still exists. Now, initially, the system and Synological in general will initially focus solely on feature-length motion pictures. Now, the reason for that is that's primarily what I watch. That's not to say that there's no merit in short films. That's not to say that there's no merit in television, limited series, things along those lines. It's just what I gravitate towards. And then lastly, in order to make sure that it is an independent entity that is free of, but incorporative of, studio patronage and interference, it will be incorporated as a nonprofit. That way, and again, you could argue, well, what happens if, Disney comes and just drops a big fat check on you? Are you going to be least likely to pan, Brave New World when it comes out? And that is where, again, independent entity comes into play. I don't imagine that they would do that. All right, now the cornerstone of Synological, and Synological again is the overarching website that will house all sorts of different perspectives and different types of content. But the Cine Review is where things get a little different. Because the Cine Review is going to adjudicate a work of cinema as both a movie, and movie as defined as the perceived entertainment value of the work, and a film, which is the artistic impact and innovation of the work. And it does so through this little funny funny phrase called subjective objectivity. I feel that it is important that critics, and especially anyone that would write for Cinelogical, would be able to bring in their own subjective perspective. Because that's what's going to ultimately lead to someone reacting to the words that they're writing. But they're going to do so with an understanding that, yes, this is my review. However, you need to look at something not just in the perspective of this is a Marvel movie, I hate Marvel movies, so I'm going to just trounce on it, and then that'll be that, and say that it's terrible, just don't go and see it. But instead, if you look at the work from a critical perspective as, hey, Marvel movies aren't necessarily my cup of tea, but you know what? It was actually a good movie. Like, if I turned my brain off, it was great. You know, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. Because ultimately, the Cine Review will assess the intent, the genre or genres, the subgenre or subgenres of that motion picture. So it'll give it an actual framework so that there's context to the review. It's not just purely a number. It's not a thumb. It's not a star. It's an actual context that you can say, you know what? It's Friday night. I kind of want to watch a trashy horror movie. Like, I want to see something a little more on the B level of things. What's a good B movie horror film that might be, you know what? I want it to be a little more psychological and a little less gory. Okay. Well, with the Cine Review, you can actually go into it ultimately. We're still working on building the site, so bear with me. But you'll be able to then say, hey, I'm looking for so-and-so, specifically within a genre. So I want a horror movie, but I also want some comedic elements. I want some, a little bit of gore, but I want it to be a little more on the psychological level of things. Now, ultimately, the Cine Review will utilize a natural adjective ladder, and that ladder is built of common, conversational, and easily translatable nomenclature understood by most English speakers. Now, this will, for the most part, be driven by American film criticism, not necessarily for American films, because I think that's rather limiting, but I do want it to ultimately, in terms of adjudication, speak the same way that we speak when we talk to each other about cinema. So it's not something where, you know, oh yeah, dude, it got a 95. Okay, what does that mean? It could mean a lot of different things, or nothing at all. Because essentially this is the breakdown for the Cine Review. So you have the title of the motion picture, the genre, the subgenre, and then again, as an umbrella of cinema, you have movie. Okay, is it an amazing movie? Bless you. Is it something that you were riveted from start to finish? It was visually appealing. You loved the characters. There was nothing wrong with it in terms of pure entertainment. Or was it a slight step down? Or was it just a good movie? And I would say the majority of people that I talk with whenever I talk about cinema, we come out of the theater and usually it's a good movie. It just barely, you know, like, it had its issues, but on the whole, it was good. You know, it wasn't a bad night at the theater. Now, when you get into bad movie, terrible movie, and awful movie, we've all seen those, and we've all said it exactly like that. So again, it's important to use language that we're already using in order to accurately describe what you might be able to go and see if you're reading the review beforehand, or what this reviewer thought after seeing it. And then on the film side, it's the same. Amazing film, great film, good film, bad film, terrible, and awful. Again, we have described both movies and films in that way, but now it's just enough of a paradigm shift for the reviewer to understand that you can't just stick a number on it. Or another aspect that I didn't talk about at all was the fact that Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes frequently use reviews from reviewers that do not give a rating at all. And they have to infer what that might be through the text. And again, that can mean anything, and depending upon the film or movie, it could mean nothing at all. So, how Cine Review stacks up versus other rating methods? Now, because of this umbrella of cinema, we've got a lot of different ways that we can look at a work of cinema. It can be an amazing movie and an awful film. It can be an amazing film and an awful movie. So we have those linkages coming up to 36 distinct combinations. Because again, it's not a nebulous number where you're just like, well, what does a 95 mean? Because the Cine Review has context. It's giving you what the genre is, what the subgenre is, so that if you are specifically looking for that type of work, you can go directly to it and say, that's what I want. Whereas stars, especially if it's a 4-star setting, it only has 9 indistinct ratings because, again, what do the stars mean? Unless they are segmented. But even within those segments, like when we're talking about the tomato meter and Metascore, there's only 4 ratings, and they're very indistinct because you've got to swing from, 0 to 60. Okay. How many of you would feel comfortable with getting a grade from 0 to 60, and that's your grade? I wouldn't, not one bit. So, 4 stars was, actually the star rating was invented in the early 1930s by a female critic, I believe for like the New York Press was the publication. So stars have been around for a long time, but really didn't come into vogue in terms of critical evaluation until probably the 70s and 80s. You started to see those used a lot more. But even with that, you have 9 indistinct ratings. 5 stars, if they kind of like with Letterboxd use 5.1, 5 points, or 4.1, 4.2, then you've got anywhere from 11 to 100 indistinct ratings. But again, because we don't know what kind of movie it is and any sort of framework to put it in, we're left sort of fumbling in the dark or relying on a number that really doesn't have much reliance. Letter grades, F through A+, 13 indistinct ratings. And then good old thumbs. We've got thumbs up, thumbs down, mid thumb, no thumb. That's 4. So ultimately for the future, I'm looking to build Cinelogical up and identify and cultivate astute critical voices and diverse perspectives that ultimately will accurately mirror the current and future makeup of the movie-going population. The movie-going population is a lot more diverse than just one type of person, which typically, when we look at film criticism, is largely white, largely male, and usually in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. That still, to some extent, is the case today, but it's becoming far more diverse, and so is the critical appraisal. Ultimately, the aggregate groups, as it grows, would be number 1, in-house cinelogical cinema critics. Secondly, outside film critics who use the Cine Review system. And then lastly, registered cinelogical users, because I think most people now want to have that type of interaction. Without it, it's not as sticky of a site, and you won't spend much time on it. You'll just kind of go there, check something out, and then the bounce rate, which was on the previous screen, means that you're just looking for one thing, and then you're off to another site. Now, in terms of, and again, this is sort of pie in the sky, as cineological's respect and popularity grow, ultimately, local, regional, national, and international chapters will be established. Because, again, cinema is a global phenomenon. America, in terms of export, culture is our number 1 thing. So we want to maintain that, but also want to get different perspectives that go beyond just a single country. And then lastly, extend the reach of the Cine Review method to other artistic mediums. So that would include music, video games, whatever's out there and where it would actually fit in. very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm open to any questions that you might have about Cinelogical, Cine Review, or anything else.
Well, let's open up the floor for questions.
Be shy.
Okay, how do people get paid?
Again, good question. People would get paid, especially if you're a cinematological writer, because if it's nonprofit, you're still able to generate
So
revenue.
is it based on page per views and from your website? Because one of the things that critics have trouble with is getting compensation for their work.
Oh, absolutely,
So is it from your site that people would get paid, or would you link to their monetized site
It would be specifically from Cinelogical.
from Cinelogical?
Yeah, so, you know, as a nonprofit, you're able to bring in, you know, revenue, you're able to, you know, in many ways that is currently being done on all of the sites. I think the only promise I would ever have is that Cinelogical would never have pop-up ads that are just ridiculous and irritating, because that decreases the user experience. That makes people not want to go to your site and explore it or participate in it.
Right.
So yeah, so it would definitely be very much focused on that. And then if you were a critic that had your own site and wanted to use the Cine Review system for their adjudication, then you would be sort of an adjunct member, and we would point you towards that other site.
To the monetized site?
Yeah, so if they had their own website and needed that click, by all means, go ahead. But we would appreciate that aggregation.
That's what RT does.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I have a lot of questions. That was really interesting. So, one of them is, so do you think that like the critics, from what you presented, it sounded like the critics are more positive than the average user? You know what I mean? Like that they seem, I mean, are the kids pumped up because of this weird, you know, who knows what goes in the sauce, how they make the sausage? But is it the case that critics are more positive about movies than the average moviegoer?
I think that across the board, critics, and as I saw it, I mean, and that really surprised me when I was doing my research. I was really